Well, let's start with a quiz. Who is the not so good looking one in the picture? That's President Musharraf. I had a meeting with him in which he promised his audience and then told us frankly that he was going to go back to Pakistan on 13th of March of 2012 and contest elections. And I volunteered to conduct his, it's called Salatul Janaza, that means the prayer of funeral, via Skype. I said, I'm not even going to come down there. I'll do it over Skype. But he couldn't go there. He didn't even bother to go back. I'm going to try and give you an overview of these three countries, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And as I was listening to the excellent overview that was given, I realized that the population multiplies 6 times. Take Afghanistan, 30 million, multiply by 6 times, you have Pakistan, multiply that by 6 times, and you have India. There's something interesting about it, 666. So, all right. So, all right. You're all familiar with this region. It is now increasingly called South Asia. A lot of South Asians in the US now in the diaspora like to call themselves as South Asians. If somebody identifies themselves, if somebody is from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh and says, I'm a South Asian, that means they are very friendly with somebody from the other country. They are either married, they could be an Indian married to a Pakistani or a Pakistani married to an Indian, or they're very friendly. So they like to assert the fact that we have a shared and common identity, and that common identity is South Asian, which means we are all crazy about Shah Rukh Khan, we like kebabs and samosas, and we all participate in these strange, bizarre dancing competitions which are now taking over American universities. That's what being a South Asian really means. Beyond that, there is not much depth, especially in the second and the third generations. But nevertheless, South Asia is a very interesting region. This is South Asia. We will be talking only about Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. I occasionally teach a course on South Asia, and I also include, beside these 3 countries in it, Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Canada. Yes, the second language of Western Canada is Punjabi. So in high schools in Ontario, in Vancouver, etc., you either study English or Punjabi. I'm not kidding. There are about 1 million South Asians now in Canada, a country which is smaller than Afghanistan in terms of population. And I think of the 4 MPs from the Toronto region, 2 are South Asians. They definitely are Muslim, that I know. So Muslims and South Asians have a significant presence now in Canada. And now that Obama has won the election, so the population of Canada is going to reduce. So I think the percentage of South Asians in Canada will increase. So I also include Canada. Maybe in another 10 years, I will start including Australia and New Zealand also as part of South Asia. But nevertheless, this is a very important region. And from a geopolitical perspective, to understand why this region is so important, you have to take a slightly bigger view of it. Okay, now look at this picture. The difference between the previous picture and this picture is that I have included China and Iran. And when you look at this picture now, you see that of the 8 nuclear powers in the world, 3 are in this picture. And unlike the others, they are contiguous. And if you add Russia on the top, you actually have 4 nuclear powers in the area. It's a very interesting and dangerous mix. Not only that, if you add Iran to it, you already have an aspirant. If you believe Netanyahu, the bomb is nearly out. You know, it's like a baby. The baby is about to be delivered right now. So this region is becoming, therefore, very volatile, very powerful. But there's something else in this region. This region is not just militarily a powder keg. It is also economically booming. You have the 2nd and the 3rd biggest economies in the world in that region now. If you make what is called as an adjustment for purchasing power parities, which means do you all know what purchasing power parity is? Like, for example, a dollar can get you certain things in the US. In India, you can get all of that much for, say, 30 cents. So if you make that kind of adjustment to the economy on the purchasing power, you will find that China is the second biggest economy in the world, and India is the third biggest economy in the world. But without even that adjustment, they are the fastest growing and some of the biggest economies in the world. But what is interesting is that in spite of the global recession that we have been seeing, which is literally devastating Europe and parts of the United States, these two countries have not been affected that strongly by the global recession. It has affected their growth rates. India is going to be a little wobbly this year, but they will average. India about 5 to 7%, and China anywhere between 8 to 9%, and continue that same rate of growth that they have for the last 10, 15 years. Those are enormous rates. 20, 30 years ago, if India and China were growing at that high rates, it was not very significant because the base was small. It's like saying if you make $1,000 a year and you get a 100% raise, it is just another $1,000. But if you're like Romney and make $21 million a year and you get a 100% raise, then that's a lot of money. It's like a GDP of a small country, right? So that is an important thing. Now these countries have been growing for such a long time. They have big economies, huge economies, and yet, even though the base is growing, the growth rate is not getting affected, and that's the most significant part of their economies. Another significant part about China and India's growth rate is that prior to that, if you had looked at all the other fast-growing economies, the Asian tigers like Japan, Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, and to some extent even Germany, a lot of these countries dependent on US consumption. So it is the US middle class which is not only driving US economy but also driving the global economy. To some extent, China still depends. China has a huge Trojan horse in the US. It's called Walmart. Okay, if you go to Walmart, it's nothing but China's showroom for Chinese products. It's an amazing thing. I think there's somebody in China who's like the Chinese version of Jon Stewart, and he has a bet going with somebody saying, can we make a list of all the useless things that we can make, useless and worthless things that we can make and sell to Americans? And that's, I think, what Walmart is. But nevertheless, if you exclude Walmart, these India and China, because of their large middle classes, are capable of driving their own economies based on their own consumption, like the US does. The US does not need to depend on what the Greeks buy or what the British buy or what the Japanese buy or not buy for its economy to grow. And similarly, in the long run, both India and China can be dependent because they have middle classes which are bigger than the entire population of the United States. The middle class in China is probably more than 500 million, and in India, close to 300 to 400 million people who qualify as middle class, who like to buy cars, use consumer finance, buying houses, televisions, iPhones, etc. So that is an important part. The point that I'm trying to stress is that not only are these nuclear powers, but they have economies which are not that susceptible to international vagaries as other economies might be. Now what does it do to them? They are either already challengers to the US or are going to become the challengers to the US on the global front. The question is, which of the two will be the next Soviet Union? Or which of the two will become a major competitor of the United States for global hegemony? There have been a lot of debates in the past few years, whether it is India or China. Each has a different advantage. China's economy is still significantly bigger than India's, probably 2 or 2.5 times. Its military is also bigger, But India has certain advantages over China, which can be translated into soft power. Once Jackie Chan dies, there will be no competition for Shah Rukh Khan on the global stage from the Chinese film industry. But if you go and watch movies, I was in Marrakesh last summer. It was really, really hot. It was 114 degrees, and I didn't know what to do. So I walked into a movie theater, and I thought I would chill in an air-conditioned movie theater for a couple of hours. And all options were Hollywood 1, Bollywood 1, Bollywood 2, Bollywood 3, and Tom Cruise. So it was basically Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, Saif Ali Khan. So it was Khan, 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 or Cruise. That was the only option available. And it was the same across North Africa, most of the Arab world. I don't know if anybody is here from Egypt or is familiar. But since 1950s, the Egyptians have a tradition that after Eid, they all sit down and watch a Bollywood film. They actually have a channel in Egypt just dedicated to Indian movies. So India has tremendous soft power. When I travel sometimes in the Arab world, it becomes very problematic for me when I encounter low-level government officials. They become very suspicious because I look like this. I'm an American who speaks Arabic. So they think CIA all the time. So I just don't say I'm an American. I just say I'm Indian, and I am. Suddenly they respect you more, which is amazing. And you get through customs and lots of other things much faster. And so I have experienced firsthand this soft power that India has, which China does not have in many parts of the world. But nevertheless, you cannot play in the big leagues unless you win in minor leagues. And that is India's biggest problem. It is stuck in the minor league game with Pakistan. Either India wins that game or calls it a draw and changes the league. So as long as this conflict that India has over Kashmir, this ongoing, non-stop war, cold, hot, official, unofficial. The two countries have fought 4 wars, 3 official wars and 1 Kargil war, which was unofficial, which had 50,000 casualties, even though neither country actually acknowledges that they fought a war. And until that thing is not resolved, India will remain a regional player. The point that I'm trying to make is this. The future of global politics, the future of global geopolitics depends on the outcome of the geopolitics of South Asia. The winner from South Asia, this is like a semifinals. The winner from South Asia will take on the big champ. But there's something interesting going on. The champion is also playing in that semifinal. The power that is not written there is the US. The US has 68,000 troops in Afghanistan. A little bit north, it has nearly 20,000 in Tajikistan. The US has its 6th fleet right around the corner. So the US has a bigger military presence in that region than, say, Russia or China or other players. So even though this region is not contiguous to the United States, the US is present and has been present there for a brief period between, say, 89 to 2001. The US has been there since the 70s. So it is, from a geopolitical perspective, this is a very important region. What I'm going to do is give you some characteristics, general characteristics of the region, and then I will talk to you about each country from 2 perspectives. I'll look at the country from the country's perspective itself, and then look at it from a US perspective, and do the same for all the other 3 countries, so you get a view from the east and view from the west. Now, if you look at it, like I said, it has contiguous nuclear powers who are also emerging regional powers. Iran, thanks to a war in Iraq, has become a major player in the Middle East. Why do you think this Gaza war is so dangerous? For the first time, Hamas has been able to hit targets in Tel Aviv. And why is it able to hit targets in Tel Aviv? because of Fajr rockets provided by Iran. Iran has provided all kinds of assistance to resistance in Iraq, to Afghans. The Iranians have challenged the US in the Middle East. And in a very counterintuitive way, even though Iran's material capacity has not increased significantly, it has become an increasingly more influential player in the region, primarily because of the liberation of Iraq. It has a strong ally in Iraq in the Arab world. Iran also has significant interest in Afghanistan. The reason why is a significant portion of Afghans are Shia. There are some very important Shia shrines, like the Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan, which everybody is interested. A lot of refugees from Afghanistan have already entered into Iran. Iran is the way through Iran, Afghans sell drugs. Afghans are selling drugs even in Iran. So Iran has lots of interests in Afghanistan. The Taliban and the Taliban's brand of Islam is very, very hostile to the Shias, to the Iranians. In fact, the Taliban, who are like the Saudis in many of their fundamental beliefs, Wahhabis or Salafis, they actually think that the Shias are not Muslims. So for Iran, there are opportunities in Afghanistan, there are threats in Afghanistan, and so Iran has one foot in the region. And if the United States does fulfill its promise and withdraws a large number of its troops from Afghanistan in 2014, it will leave a power vacuum in the area, and you can expect Iran to move in. If there is a power vacuum in Afghanistan, it'll be interesting to see who will compete. We know the three players who will definitely compete for influence in Kabul. They are India, Pakistan, and Iran. They will try to fill the gap that the US will leave if it withdraws. The second thing that I would like you to know is that even if the US withdraws from the region militarily, it will remain significantly entangled and engaged in the region for many reasons. For example, US withdrawal from Afghanistan does not automatically mean that the reasons why US is interested in Afghanistan will disappear, which is the Taliban. In fact, the Taliban, I bet, will be in Kabul within a few months of the US departure. The US has not succeeded in either eliminating the threat or even diminishing the capacity of Taliban. They continue to remain strong, and they are stronger now than they were 10 years ago. The Afghanistan story is like one of those Twilight Zone episodes. You could watch it on Star Trek or something like that. The world's most powerful country has waged war against the world's poorest country for 11 years. And at the end of it, the world's more richest and the powerful country is nearly broke. And Afghanistan is just Afghanistan, and the Taliban are stronger than ever. It's just mind-boggling. It's an important lesson which I think after listening to the presidential debates, I can tell you that many Americans have not listened. They're thinking of military power in the conventional sense as we thought of it during Cold War does not necessarily guarantee desired political outcomes. With all its military power, with all its economic power, with all its diplomatic power, the US rarely gets what it desires in the Muslim world, while other countries like Iran, with much less influence, seems to be having a greater impact on the political outcomes in the region with very little money and very little power. Nevertheless, the US will remain engaged in Afghanistan because of Taliban. The US will remain engaged in Pakistan because the US has significant interests. US will remain engaged with India and China. So even though we withdraw our troops, it doesn't mean, all it means is there will be less combat missions. That is all I think it means. It's quite possible we may replace boots on the ground with more drones in the air. That's possible. We don't know that yet. So these are some general things that I want you to remember. You should also remember this is one of the poorest regions in the world in spite of the tremendous growth. More than 50, 60% of the world's poorest people live in the region, both in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. If you add Bangladesh to it, you know, you always hear these stories about how people live on $1 a day, $2 a day. Well, those 75% of those people who live on less than $2 a day live in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh in South Asia, and so is Afghanistan. Afghanistan is also an extremely poor, underdeveloped country. Rumsfeld used to be so frustrated. He said, I'm just frustrated that I have to shoot $5 million missiles at $10 tanks. And that's how he thought of Afghanistan, the whole country. The target was less than $10, and you're shooting cruise missiles at it, which cost $1 million or more. And I don't know why he was frustrated. He should go and have an IQ test. That should probably what he should have done. But nevertheless, that is a huge challenge. But what is also interesting about these regions are that these regions are in tremendous transition. They are modernizing. They are still in the process of building nations. They have not become stable nations. Becoming a modern state has certain characteristics. Like one of the most important characteristics of a modern state is its capacity to have a monopoly over violence within its territory. And Pakistani military, for example, can do nothing in its northwestern frontier province. It just can't. It does not have monopoly on violence in significant parts. It cannot even impose its constitution or its laws. That clearly raises the question whether this is a fully functioning modern state. And if you look at Afghanistan, the tribal instinct is so strong among Afghans that it is very difficult to talk about a national identity. The identity of being a Pashtun, for example, and most of the Pashtuns are part of the Taliban movement, is much, much more stronger than, say, being an Afghan. The value system of the Pashtuns is named after their ethnicity, not after their country. So it's very interesting. The value system that guides Pashtuns, for example, is not Afghan nationalism, not even Islamic ethics or Islamic law. They have their own ethnic code of conduct. That was one of the reasons why they would not give up bin Laden to the US, saying that it is against Pashtunwali, as they call it. So these countries are not fully developed. Even the case of India, with all its great achievements, it still has a large amount of people in poverty, in underdevelopment. There is, for example, to give you some shocking things about India, there is an ongoing invisible genocide that has been taking place in India of female infants. Yes, it's female infanticides. I think in the last 10 years, Indians have killed literally millions of female infants because they don't want to have girl babies, they want to have boy babies. They go use ultrasound scanners, identify the child's sex, and then abort the female fetus. Well, this is not a sign of a developed or modern society. So these countries are still developing. They may have nuclear weapons. Some of them may have advanced economies. Some of them may get more patents than Microsoft Seattle. For example, Microsoft Bangalore has 3 times more patents every year now than Microsoft in Washington. But nevertheless, so there is this constant challenge of developing. Populations are growing at a significant rate, creating jobs, etc. So that is an enduring characteristics. And in all of that, the thing that aggravates everything, aggravates poverty, aggravates ethnic conflict, aggravates geopolitical conflicts, is religion. And the religion that is at the heart of contention here is Islam. For India, it has the largest Muslim minority. Until recently, it was the second biggest Muslim country in terms of population. There are nearly 165 million Muslims in India. It's like adding Iran to Egypt, that's that man. It's only Indonesia and Pakistan have more Muslims, and maybe soon Bangladesh than India. So India has a huge minority challenge. of integrating this. And what has happened is, I don't know, have you ever parked your car at a signal and had some big truck parked next to you, and you see how your engine sort of resonates with the engine on the side, like, and then your car also suddenly starts doing it? That's what happens to Muslims. If Muslims start buzzing over in one country, they start buzzing in the other, and they don't even know it. What's happening to me? He said, oh, the engine is revving. It's a physical. And so that's what happens. Suddenly there's a lot of Islamic fervor. People are talking about creating Islamic states, Islamic economies, Islamic, all kinds of things. Islamic dating also in the US now. So that fervor does. For example, when I left India in 1992, I rarely saw a hijab. Now, when I go to my hometown in Hyderabad, there are more hijabs in Hyderabad city than there are probably in the whole of Arab world. Where did these come from? They're watching TV, they're on satellite television, they're on Facebook, there's resonance, so it's actually changing the way people dress, changes the way people think, and so this emerging global identity of a highly politically conscious, politically aware, politically active Muslim, man or woman, is also resonating in India. Some of it is very creative. I just heard that a woman in Chicago wrote a book called I Cover, like iPad, iPhone, I Cover, and she's talking about her experiences wearing a hijab in Chicago. So yeah, some of it is very creative. Some of it can be very dangerous. Okay, so you see the resonance of everything Islamic in India too, which really makes people who are in power in places like India or other places where Muslims are in minority very nervous when they begin to see these global resonance of Islamic identity markers like hijab, like talks of Islamic financing, Islamic banking, creation of Islamic schools, opening of Islamic universities, women in non-Arab countries dressing like Arab women, and so on and so forth. So India is very nervous and continues to remain nervous about its Muslim population. I qualified twice to go into India's Air Force, once after 12th grade and once after engineering. The second time, they were trying to push me towards engineering. The only reason why I wanted to go into the Air Force was to fly MiGs. And they had all kinds of discussions. But the second time I was much smarter. But the first time when I got in, I could not understand what it was. And they kept talking about big planes and bombers and stuff. I said, no, if you don't put me into the MiG program, I'm not joining the Air Force. They said, you won't know that for one more year. And then finally, my father introduced me to a very senior Air Force officer, and he told me bluntly, son, you're a Muslim, and I'm not very sure. The only country that we fight is a Muslim country. I am not very sure whether we will let you fly our most important weapon. At that time, I was 17, and you can imagine, well, you can guess why I'm here now. But that was an issue, and it continues to remain an issue, even though India has had Air Force chiefs who were Muslim. The first Indian ace was a Muslim. Ace is a person who shoots down 5 enemy aircrafts, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, this whole issue of what to do with minorities, what to do with these 47%. They're just takers. We can't trust them. They're not real Americans. Traditional America is dead. It's like that. They're not real Indians. They're not traditional Indians. They're Muslims. They even dress like foreigners now, especially their women, and so on and so forth. So this whole identity politics of Muslim minorities is an issue. For example, if you remember, Herman Cain in the US said, when I become president, he doesn't even pause for people to laugh at the joke, but he just continues. When I become president, I'll make sure that there is no Muslim in the cabinet. We didn't run this guy out as the biggest bigot in town. He continued to raise funds. He can't say that, just change that with something else. When I become president, I'll have no Hispanic in my cabinet. When I become president, I'll have no Jew in my cabinet. When I become president, I'll have no black. See how it sounds horrible? But it doesn't sound that bad, right? When you say, when I become president, I'll have no Muslim in my cabinet. It's like that. There are people like that who are really serious kind in India. And so Muslims continue to feel alienated, continue to feel marginalized. There was a major survey done 3-4 years ago. It's called the Sachar Commission Report. You can look at it, it's on the website, which talked about how there is structural discrimination against Muslims in every level uh, in the public sector, in the private sector, in the education sector, in the police forces, in the armed forces. So even though India is a huge welfare state, Muslims benefit from the welfare much less than other minorities and other communities and other identities. At least there's an acknowledgement by the state that this marginalization can lead to alienation, can lead to disenchantment, and can lead to problems. And so India continues to have its Muslim problem, even though I reluctantly want to use the phrase as a Muslim problem. And every country in the region has this issue. Same with Pakistan, same with Afghanistan, same with Iran, and I'll talk about it more when I talk about each country. And all of that now resonates with the US. And the best example of that was this film, The Innocence of Muslims, this movie that was made. And you saw the reaction to it across the board, even in India and other places. So there is this globalization does a lot of good things, but globalization is like a high-speed highway connecting the world. You can drive wonderful cars on it, but you could also send hazardous material with the same speed across borders. And sometimes with the rise of social media, it has really, we can just spread disenchantment, anger, frustration, like a virus very quickly, just through Twitter and Facebook. All right, let's look at Afghanistan. This is Afghanistan. Afghanistan, a country of 30 people, it's known as the graveyard of empires. That's the reputation. They like to bury empires, physically or economically. Russia was not defeated by Afghanistan. Russia got broke. If we don't pull out by 2014, I guarantee you we will also eventually go broke if we don't go broke by January 1st. We are already at the fiscal cliff, right? Maybe some Taliban is going to push us. So the challenge of, now what is interesting is that if there were no geopolitical problems in Afghanistan, which means no problem with the Soviets, no problem with Taliban, no problem with America, no problem with Pakistan, etc. If they were all, like those who sing Kumbaya in the morning and the evening, they would still have significant problems of underdevelopment, lack of resources, lack of infrastructure, and poverty. So as it is, they have lots of problems. On top of that, they have this whole, I don't know what to say, 3 decades of war. There's nothing that has happened in Afghanistan for 3 decades except wars with different players involved in that. So you have generations of, 2 generations of people in Afghanistan who know nothing but war. Now the issue with Taliban is very interesting. Taliban, we especially after 9/11 and Taliban's association with Al-Qaeda, we have now labeled Taliban as an extremist group, etc., and we have vilified and demonized their understanding of Islam, etc. But we had no problem with this same understanding of Islam throughout the 70s and 80s. For example, you could go back and look at pictures of Taliban leaders with people like George Senior Bush, with Jesse Helms and Jim Baker and others shaking hands in Washington. All of these guys used to fly in here. Hikmat Yar and others were very popular in Washington. They were introduced as freedom fighters, etc., fighting the evil communists. It's only when they turned their guns on the US that suddenly became evil. So some of the values that the Taliban have espoused are neither new nor alien to the region itself. So in many ways, it is safe enough to argue that the reason why Taliban endures is because it's an authentic movement. It is a grassroots movement. Its values are very common to the region, what the Taliban believe, most Pakhtuns believe and share. And that's why they don't have to market their values. They continue to have recruits, etc. The US, I really don't know, even though I've sat on many of these congressional reviews of these policies and testified on a few occasions, but it's clear that we don't know what the US wants to do. When they say we want to crush Taliban, we don't know what they mean, because we don't know who the fighter is and who the citizen is. You could be a school teacher in the morning, and you could be a Taliban fighter on the weekends. And you could be fighting a warlord, you could be fighting a drug lord, you could be fighting Pakistani police, you could be fighting US, you could be fighting the Canadians, and you could be fighting Afghan army. So it's not very clear what we mean when we say we want to crush Taliban. We want to crush an idea. I mean, the US has been fighting wars against nouns, war on drugs, war on poverty, war on women. Which one have we won? None. So why do you think we're going to win this war? I don't understand. Because there's a lack of clarity on what we are combating. The other thing is, if we think that we can just eliminate the power base of the Taliban by arming other people, it hasn't worked yet. The US defeated the Nazis in 3.5 years. And we have a much more powerful US has failed to defeat the Taliban in 3 times the time. I think we need to rethink the strategy. I don't know what the answer is. I don't have the intelligence that Petraeus has when he's not distracted. But I don't have that intelligence to tell you what can be a decisive strategy in Afghanistan. But what I can tell you is it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for a long time. So the US has to rethink what's going to happen, because the Taliban's values and religion cannot be changed. And so even modernization does not mean, because if we make Taliban and Afghanistan rich, very rich, it'll look like Saudi Arabia. No change in values, just nicer cars, nicer malls. Saudi Arabia is like a big mall in the desert. That's all it is. You know, and that's what Afghanistan will look like if it becomes prosperous. They might continue to have the same values. The women will just wear expensive burqas and perfumes, but they will wear burqas. So this whole idea of change. Change cannot come unless it is authentic and from inside, unless people want to change. The more people from outside want to force it, they see that as a threat to their identity, and they will fight it and actually hold on to their identity and their values, no matter how dysfunctional, more strongly than ever before, just because people are threatening. Okay? That is Afghanistan. If you have any questions more, I'd like to answer. One of the other challenges for Afghanistan, besides nation building and fighting this so-called religious extremism, it doesn't make sense to me talking about religious extremism, because to me the whole country is like that. Like there is no mainstream in Afghanistan. They all have the same religious values. Then there are those who are extremely westernized, but they also live in 2 worlds. But the issue is of these foreign powers. Right now, all these powers, Iran, Pakistan, India, and the US are all over Afghanistan. And they are pursuing different interests, and they're trying to push the Afghan government in different directions. And it's like imagine playing a tennis match with 4 coaches. And one is saying, hit a backhand, he can hit a backhand, and the other is saying, no, lob it. The other is saying, hit a forehand, and you don't know what to do. And I think that's what's happening to Afghanistan. It has too many coaches and trying to guide it in different directions. So what about the US in Afghanistan? The US is not going to withdraw even by 2024. Anybody wants to take a bet? Okay. It might reduce the presence of its troops to the levels of maybe 25,000 to 30,000, but you will see that beyond 2014, the US will have maybe 50% of the troops that it has now. There are 68,000 now. There'll probably be 30,000 in 2015. What happens after the US draws down? We know what happens. That's why we teach and read history, right? Okay, you know what happened in 1989? I guarantee you the Taliban will be back within a year. Mr. Karzai will disappear, voluntarily or involuntarily. It's his choice. He has nice restaurants in Baltimore. He should come back and focus on cooking kebabs. He should be actually on the first plane with the Marines. He should not even wait to take the last one out of Kabul, because there is no security, no safety for him once the US get out of Kabul. He doesn't even govern the whole of Afghanistan. I consider him as the mayor of South Kabul. There's also a technical problem. He's completed his terms. So now we don't know. He can't run for president again. and there is no replacement that Americans trust. So we don't know who is going to be the next president. You know, we are stewing in problems made of our own doing. I don't know what I know I'm misstating that statement. Nevertheless, what will happen when the Taliban return? Will they bring Al-Qaeda with it? Will Al-Qaeda once again become strong in Afghanistan under the tutelage of Taliban? Before 2001, the Taliban let Al-Qaeda do whatever they wanted. But now they may just want to help Al-Qaeda because they don't like us anymore. That's a very serious question. Will Al-Qaeda get another base in Afghanistan all over again? And why not? What of Pakistan? Afghanistan is very important for Pakistan. Pakistan provides what is called as strategic depth to Pakistan. Imagine how many of you play tennis? Or at least watch? Okay, let's say you're playing tennis against a really powerful player who has a very big serve, like Andy Roddick. So you have to keep moving back and back. So if you're playing indoor, there's not enough space to go back, then you can never return his serve. You're going to get hit. You're like playing like that. But if there's more stress, you just keep stepping back till you can handle the pace. So Afghanistan is like that for Pakistan. If they get into a big fight with India and they need to retreat, then Afghanistan is supposed to give it its strategic depth. So for Pakistan, Afghanistan is strategically very important. And that's why India wants to be in Afghanistan. It wants to cut it off. There will be no escape route for Pakistan if India's troops are on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's called encirclement. India would love to encircle Pakistan. So Pakistan is never going to let Afghanistan go. It's like a prison situation. Okay? They want Afghanistan to be their BITCH. And if the US leaves it, they will move in very quickly, very quickly. They will help Taliban to once ever take over before Iran or India can really position themselves strongly inside Afghanistan. Will Iran become more powerful? Yes, most definitely. Iran will become most powerful. There have been at least 2 occasions where Iran has scrambled its air force to threaten the Taliban and threaten the Afghans, and if the US withdraws. If you are in Iran today, if you look on your left, what do you see? You don't see Afghanistan. You see 100,000 Americans. And when you look on your right, you see Americans. Thousands of Americans in Iraq, thousands of Americans in Afghanistan. When you look down, you see thousands of Americans in Bahrain, in Qatar, and all American ships. If you look north towards Tajikistan, you'll see Americans. So if you're an Iranian military general, you're looking at the map, you're really surrounded by America, if you're Iran. They should be having nightmares, not we. For some reason, we have Iran nightmares. But if the US were to withdraw from Afghanistan, it opens a door for Iran to break this encirclement. It could do lots of interesting things. It's also trying to build a pipeline connecting India and Iran bypassing Pakistan, also trying to help Afghanistan have an alternative access to the ocean. Right now, everything from Afghanistan goes to Karachi. They want it to go through other seaports through Iran. So Iran is going to be all over Afghanistan for cultural, economic, and for political influence. There are lots of Shias in Afghanistan who really, really need Iran's help to fend off the Taliban's religious and cultural assault on their faith and on their religious symbols. All right, this is Pakistan. Do you recognize those pictures? Pakistan is a fascinating place. Tradition, modernity, and post-modernity all coexist on the same street. It is very interesting. If you went to Karachi, you would find people riding donkeys as if this is the Middle Ages. You'll find women driving cars and editing newspapers and becoming foreign ministers and ambassadors. So postmodern. And of course, you have modernists advocating nationalism and democracy and so on. So you see that time is warped because you see tradition, modernity, and postmodernity all coexisting in the same place. It's a fascinating place. But with Pakistan, as far as we are concerned, it has an interesting relationship with the US. It is now the biggest recipient of US aid this year, more than Israel for the first time in a long, long time. And it is also the country with the highest rate of anti-Americanism. I think less than 15% Pakistanis have anything nice to say about the US, which is very interesting. Anti-Americanism is high. The primary reason for the current new wave of anti-Americanism in Pakistan is the drone attacks. In the last 3 to 4 years, about 6,000 Pakistani civilians have died. 3,000 of them killed by the extremists like Taliban and other groups, and the rest by the US through drone attacks. It's like the US is competing with Taliban to see who kills more Pakistanis. There's no dialogue in the US about it at all. It's so fascinating. We're so obsessed with this dialogue in Benghazi, but that is a bigger drain on number of Americans killed there. We've already lost more than 2,000 in Afghanistan. Billions and literally $1 trillion wasted, and we are making people more and more furious and furiouser, if you can use that word, and there is no dialogue about it. I really don't understand why. This country needs to have a very serious dialogue about what it's doing in Pakistan and whether we need to continue doing the same thing. Pakistan has the same challenge. Pakistan is like Israel, the only two countries which were created for religious nationalism. They were born roughly at the same time, Israel in 48, Pakistan in 47. Israel was a country created for Jews. Pakistan was a country created for Muslims. And like Israel, which is supposed to be not a Jewish state in terms, when you say Islamic state, like Jewish laws, it's a democracy for Jews. And Pakistan was also conceived as a liberal democracy for Muslims. But Pakistanis do not have a consensus over it now. And so, since the rise of Jamaat Islami, people like Maulana Maududi and others, since 1960s, especially from their first constitutional debate, which the liberals did win, Pakistan has two competing visions. Is Pakistan a democracy for Muslims, or is Pakistan an Islamic state which will impose the Sharia on its citizens? That is not clear, and that is the reason why Pakistan is in a state of, shall we say, low-intensity civil war. What you see in Pakistan today is a low-intensity civil war. The reason why I'm saying low-intensity is because only 10,000 people have died in the last 5-6 years. It's in such a huge country. It's not like Syria, where everybody's bombing and shooting at each other. The bombs are occasional, maybe once a week, Friday to Friday. So, but there is a huge disagreement within the Pakistani community of what their country is, what they stand for. And until they have a more peaceful dialogue and a consensus. You must remember, when I came to the US early days, I used to find US democracy rather silly. I said, they don't have a democracy. They have these two parties which they agree 95% of everything. They are vote collecting machines. That's why they spend so much money. Look at us. We are just like we were. On the 7th of November, the US was identical to the 5th of November, except we spent $6 billion in between for very little change. And at first, that used to look really stupid and silly. You could have 3 University of Delawares in that $6 billion. We'd be much better off if we spent. And then it suddenly hit me. I said, no, my God, this country's biggest strength is its consensus. The reason why you have two parties which agree upon 90% is because the whole country is agreed. We have to be rich no matter what, right? Now we have a problem because there is no consensus. What is happening in the US now is a breaking of this national consensus, and you see so much divergence and lack of bipartisanship because the consensus is breaking in the United States for lots of reasons. One, because we are so politically correct, we can't really talk about the real debates. Oh my God, all these colored people, they're taking over our wonderful white country. How can we have a debate like that? It's very difficult now to become politically incorrect, but so we have to talk about roundabout stuff. We're talking about Social Security, Medicare, and all of that, it comes down to this. So Pakistan is a country which never had a consensus. It's like having a cart with 4 horses, 2 pulling in this direction, 2 pulling in this direction. They're going nowhere. So they are neither a Sharia state nor are they a democracy, because they need to have a dialogue before they start pulling. They are pulling first, and they are not talking, they're just fighting. That is the biggest challenge for Pakistan. What is the purpose of Pakistan? Is it an Islamic state or is it a democracy? To make things worse, there is a culture of violence and culture of intolerance. Just a few weeks ago, a person with Down syndrome accidentally burnt a paper on which some Quran was written on through rugby. And that person was beaten to death. And then the body was burned. And the police tried to stop it. And the mob then went to the house of the chief of police and literally vandalized his house and beat up police officers. And nothing has happened to them. This is complete breaking down of civil law, collapse of the state, etc. And that culture of intolerance and violence, which is erupting at every little excuse, even false accusations, just crack a joke and there's violence in the streets, has made it impossible for Pakistanis to have a meaningful dialogue about US, relations with the US. They had a huge talk about, we need to rethink our relations with the US. But you need to have a dialogue where people are not intimidated by violence on the streets. So that is another problem which exacerbates the previous problem. Then there's this perception of decline. Oh, we are such a great country, now it's being gone, and the reason why it is getting ruined is because Indians and Israelis and Americans are plotting to destroy Pakistan. So there's all these conspiracy theories which are undermining meaningful dialogue there. For the United States, we have given them $20 billion. Okay, can you imagine if they're given that to Delaware? Wow, we would have zero unemployment, etc. Okay, yet things have got worse. Things haven't got better with US-Pakistan relations. Things have got worse. And I don't know whether you heard the phrase "tiger by the tail." You know what happens when you catch a tiger by its tail? You can't hold on to it. You let it go, it's going to bite you. So you don't know what to do. And the US is in that situation. We have a tiger by its tail, and we really don't know, should we let it go or we continue to hold? If we abandon Pakistan, then Pakistan will aid our enemies. And if we continue to hold hands with Pakistan, it hurts, it's expensive, because Pakistan's other hand is in our pocket, and we're not getting much for what we are giving them. So it's a very delicate and problematic situation. Plus the drone war, which is very effective, has decimated Al-Qaeda, but has also enraged a lot of people. It's quite possible we might have generated more recruits to extremism than the extremists that we have killed through this war. We are making extremists out of mainstream leaders, like Imran Khan, for example. Now he's become such an anti-American ideologue. The last candidate for that kind of politics, and that's primarily because of the drone attacks. Drone attacks are doing to Pakistan what the war in Iraq did to Arabs in terms of inciting and giving depth and history to anti-Americanism. All right, India. India's interests in Afghanistan are all about Pakistan's interests in Kashmir. It is because of Kashmir that India is interested. After 1974, when India became independent in 47. From 47 to 74, India was involved in 3 major wars. 48 with Pakistan, 65 with Pakistan, 73 with China. 74, it became a nuclear power, and then no more wars. So no nuclear-powered country has ever been attacked. You know, when the US was so eager to attack Iraq and so reluctant to attack North Korea, I figured it out. You know, I'm one of those few people who does not have common sense or intelligence in this country. So I understood. That means that the US thinks Iraq does not have nuclear weapons. That's why they're so eager to attack it. And they suspect that maybe North Korea has 1 or 2. That's why they are reluctant to attack it. No nuclear power country has really been attacked by another country as such. Yeah, terrorist attacks. So Pakistan also did that after 74. It can't now fight a conventional war with India because for both countries now, winning a conventional war is an invitation to start a nuclear war. So what's the point? Even if you fight and you win, it's a problem. So Pakistan started an alternate means of warfare, which is terrorism, and supported terrorists who did all kinds of horrible things in India, shot up India's parliament, blew up temples. If you remember what happened in Mumbai just a few years ago, 3 days of horror. So for India, there are two primary interests. One is to make sure that Pakistan stops supporting insurgency in Kashmir and starts supporting or instigating terrorism within India's borders. India is not ever going to give up Kashmir, and India is not going to attack Pakistan to take back the Kashmir that Pakistan took in 1948. The most logical conclusion to this dispute would be the line of actual control, but that hasn't happened yet. So India is going to spend a lot of money there. Plus, India also has to balance its aggressiveness in the Muslim world to make sure that it does not have an insurgency of its own at home, so it doesn't really upset a lot of Indian Muslims at home. I'm about to finish, and then I'll be happy to take questions. For the US, okay, when Bill Clinton went to Bangalore, an Indian journalist asked this question, Mr. President, how long will the US continue to two-time us? Which means that India, when will you stop dating Pakistan and marry us? That was his question. So that is a strategic question. Will the US be polygamous in the region, or will it marry India, another democracy? Will the oldest democracy marry the largest democracy? We may not have much in India, but India has 2 states in America. There are a lot of Indians who are now governors of this country. I don't know whether you know that, but Nikki Haley in South Carolina, and Bobby Jindal in Louisiana. There are a lot of Indians. The Indian diaspora has become very influential with Fareed Zakaria, etc. The first Hindu got elected to the Congress, and she's swearing in on the Bhagavad Gita like Keith Ellison did a couple of elections ago. So yes, there is a tremendous Indian presence here. The diaspora also wants good relations between India and the US, a lot of financial investments. And if US and China become global competitors, then the US would want India to be its ally rather than China's ally. And having a major nuclear power and a major economy right next to your enemy can be a tremendous asset. So eventually what is going to happen is that the US and India are going to have very strong relationships. Some people predict that the US right now has 2 countries with whom it has special relations, which is England and Israel. Very soon there will be 3 countries with whom US will have special relations. Canada doesn't count, you know that, right? Serious people don't think of Canada. Okay, so it will be India, even though Canada is our biggest trading partner. I'm going to stop at this, and we'll be happy to take questions if you have any. If you have any jokes, I'll be happy to listen to that.